Just ahead on American Black Journal, a book about a Detroit woman who ran an illegal numbers operation to make a better life for her family. Plus, a young photographer captures the faces of native Detroiters for a city project. Don't go away. American Black Journal starts now.
Masco Corporation is proud to manufacture innovative and environmentally friendly products for the home. Delta faucets, craft-made in Merillat cabinets, and Behr brand paints have all been designed with you in mind. Masco and its family of companies, serving Michigan communities since 1929.
Support also provided by the W.K. Kellogg Foundation, a partner with communities where children come first. The Cynthia and Etzel Ford Fund for Journalism at Detroit Public TV.
The DTE Foundation proudly supports 50 years of American Black Journal in covering African American history, culture, and politics. The DTE Foundation and American Black Journal, partners in presenting African American perspectives about our communities and in our world.
For nearly 100 years, Ally has been a part of Detroit, and we give back by volunteering and donating in our community. We have a commitment to diversity and increasing economic mobility in our hometown. At Ally, we're dedicated to doing it right every single day.
And viewers like you. Thank you.
Welcome to American Black Journal. I'm Stephen Henderson. We took the show out of the studios today to Motor City Java House in Detroit. Thanks to the staff here for having us. We're starting with author Bridgett Davis's first nonfiction book titled The World According to Fannie Davis. The book is set in Detroit in the 1960s and 70s and tells the story of Bridgett's mother, Fanny, and her illegal numbers running operation. I spoke with Bridgett about the book on WDET's Detroit Today.
The numbers are ubiquitous in Black culture, and most Black folks know about the numbers. They were essentially a precursor to the legal lottery. They were a thriving underground economy, actually, because many people were employed helping to keep this business running. And my mom was very instrumental because she was a bookie and a banker in the numbers, business here in the city. She started out because she'd migrated north. She'd migrated from Nashville with my dad and my three oldest siblings. The same reason so many people became part of the Great Migration. She and my dad wanted to improve their lives, their financial lives. And my father thought he could find good work, in the auto plants. And he did get a job at GM, but unfortunately he was last hired, first fired. His work was on again, off again. There was not any stability. And Detroit was a rough place. It wasn't the South, but it had its own challenges.
So one of the things you've said there, I think, is really, really poignant about Detroit. There are all of these stories in most of our families, especially African Americans in this city, about that trip north, who came and why. Usually that story is about opportunity and this idea that the North would provide more opportunity than there was in the South. Right. But more often than I think a lot of people want to talk about or admit, that opportunity wasn't as plentiful as they thought it would be, wasn't as regular as they thought it would be, and there was disappointment and poverty in the North just like there had been in the South.
That's right. In fact, in my parents' case, they came from a nurturing, supportive, pretty much healthy environment in Nashville. My mom's father was he was an entrepreneur. They lived pretty well and comfortably. So imagine leaving your comfortable home where your family has been for generations, where you have an extended family of support, and where the weather is nicer, and you come north thinking you're seeking a better situation, and you are confronted with northern racism and discrimination and the idea that you're not welcome. They couldn't find adequate housing. They were paid an exorbitant amount of money for rent that really was in a really rundown tenement. My father, as I said, couldn't get this steady work. They were struggling. In fact, in my parents' case, Poverty was the new thing in their lives when they got to Detroit. They were stunned. They were stunned by the fact that they were in this situation. My mom suffered, they all suffered through it for 2 years. And so that's the point at which my mother said, I got to do something.
I have to earn.
I
money.
have to figure this out.
Yeah.
I have to make a way out of no way.
And so she gets involved in the numbers and talk about her entree to that world. What was
Right.
that like?
Well, she had been living on a street called Delaware.
We all know that street.
You know that street. And it was, for me, an infamous street growing up because she didn't even like to mention it. She would say, I don't want to talk about it. So for me, in my mind, Delaware was this scary street because that's where she experienced poverty with her children. And so she was living there. What she did notice is that all these folks around her were playing the numbers. Not for a lot of money even, but they were doing it like consistently. It's not as though she hadn't seen the numbers in Nashville. She had. The numbers had moved across the country, but she had not sort of been up close around it. And when she noticed that, my mom was really smart. She thought, there's an opportunity here. I could actually take these people's bets. Why not? And that led her to do this incredible thing. She showed up in the middle of the night once at my Uncle John's door, her brother John. Fortunately, he had been living in Detroit for a few years. He was actually a horseman. He worked at the local racetrack. He actually went on to become one of the first African-American trainers in the country. But at the time, he had steady work. He was an exercise boy, as they called it. And so she knew he had some stability and means. And she just showed up at his door in the middle of the night. He said to me, she woke me up and everything. And she walked into his living room. She did not even take off her coat. And she said to him, John, I believe I can bank the numbers, but I just need $100. Can you loan me $100?
Which in those days, of course, was a lot more than it is today. I mean, that's an
Exactly.
unimaginable amount of money, really.
Yes, and I tell people that was 1958. And right at the same time, Berry Gordy was borrowing $800 from his family fund to start Motown, just to give you a sense, right? So that $100 was a lot, and my uncle said he listened to her. Everything she said made sense, and he said, okay, Fanny, I've got it. I'll give it to you.
And this was not just I'm going to open this business and I need money. This was also I'm going to do something that is a little bit dangerous.
Yeah, the risk wasn't exciting to her. It was simply worth it. In her mind, it was risky to not figure out a way to care for your children. She had the only options available to black women in that time in Detroit. There were only 3. You take a low-rung job in the factories for less money than the men were making, for long hours and really grueling work, or you do day work in white women's homes, or maybe you could be a cleaning woman in an office building. Well, it's not as though my mom thought she was above all that. She just thought that is senseless because that's very little money for long hours that requires me to leave my children all day to raise themselves. That's not worth it. That to her was the risk. So the opportunity to bank the numbers, that seemed like a viable option.
Right. This is a better choice than these other things.
Absolutely.
Very simple calculation.
Very simple calculation.
So what did a typical day look like for your mom when she's doing this?
Yeah, it was interesting. She was on the phone a lot. My memory of her was when she had reached a point in the business where people called in their bets. I suspect in the early days when she really just got started and she had this penny business in the late 50s, early 60s, a lot of people probably came by and literally turned in their bets, their numbers to her physically on little pieces of paper. But by the time I have a cogent memory of her running her business, she's on that telephone, taking numbers throughout the day. Sometimes a customer would say, you know, Fanny, I like going fishing on Saturday morning. I like to turn my numbers in before I leave. So I'm going to call you at 5:30 a.m., okay? Yeah. What could she say?
Right. I need the money. So
yeah, I mean, this is my business. This is what I do, and I'm reliable. and these are my customers, and I want them to know that they can depend on me.
And her success in running this business, did it attract negative attention from other people who were involved in illegal activity in Detroit?
The beauty of it is no, not at all. I never saw a crossover between the numbers and, say, drug trades or anything like that. The numbers was its own universe. And understand, people involved in this did not think of it as, something wrong. They thought this is a legitimate business that just happens to be illegal. That's how they all thought. Mm-hmm. That's how my mom thought. That's how I feel.
And did she ever have close calls with the law because it was illegal? I mean, you're at once, I think, a little nervous about other people running the numbers and people in other illegal businesses, but also trying to avoid the attention of the police, right?
Yeah, that was real. That was real. And so she had all of these safeguards that she put in place. The biggest one was we all simply knew not to tell anyone. That's why it was such a big secret that we all kept diligently.
And that's a hard thing to do, right?
It wasn't
you can't
so
talk
hard,
about what your
actually,
mother
Stephen.
does.
No, it wasn't so hard. You're right. I mean, it was hard to not talk about her because I wanted to brag about her. But think about it. Did you really feel excited to tell people what your parents did for a living? Not really.
I don't know. I feel like I can remember in kindergarten everyone bragging about what their parents did, like what their dads did. That was one of the things that always bothered me because I was like, well, my dad really just works in a hospital.
Right.
But these other people's dads were lawyers and doctors and things like that. I mean, when you're a little kid, you want to...
Well, it sounds like you went to school with more upscale folks. Because my memory is that actually, it wasn't an unusual thing not to talk about it. It is true that you usually knew what your friends' parents did because you could see, like my best friend's mom and dad worked for the post office. You kind of knew that. You saw them in their uniforms or whatever. So yeah, you're right. But keeping that secret was just my normal. I didn't struggle to keep the secret. I knew, even though it wasn't talked about, that was a way to protect her safety and therefore our livelihood. Yeah, I just was like, I will tell no one.
And talk about the success that your mom had doing this. I mean, you say it was a successful business. What does that mean in practical terms?
Right. I tried to look back as an adult and try to contextualize it. And my sense is that it was as though my mom ran a really healthy small business. I can't put a dollar amount to it, right? But I would say it was enough to give us a really stable middle class, pushing into upper middle class life. Yeah.
And did that change your lives? Did that, were you able to do things that you couldn't do before when you were relying just on your father's work?
Oh my goodness. I am fortunate that by the time I was born, my mom was already in business for a couple years. So I only remember a good life. The joke in our family was that I came home to French provincial baby furniture. Not the case for my sister, only 4 years older, because life had changed that drastically, thanks to my mom's, efforts in the business, thanks to her livelihood.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was different.
And so for you growing up, talk about what Detroit was like at that time in your neighborhood.
I loved Detroit, and I loved growing up here. Everything I remember about it is largely wonderful. And so I'm going to say as an aside, I haven't lived in Detroit for many years, so it's always a disconnect for me as I move out there in the world, in New York in particular, and people say, where are you from? And I say Detroit. I can see the assumptions in their faces.
Yeah, I'm sure you do.
Oh, yeah. And I'm like, you're so wrong. One of my missions, I think, has been as a writer to really, in whatever capacity I'm writing in, to really push back against that assumption. Because my memories are real and true. My mom bought a family home for us on Broad Street right when I was just turning 1. And that house I can tell you, I'm looking at my nephew now, he can tell you, the love we have for that house and what it meant to us, that was our symbol of life in the middle class.
And this was a part of the city that that also my family, by the way, had moved into in the late 1950s over near Russell Woods and places like that, Tuxedo.
I know exactly where that is.
And my grandparents lived on Sturtevant near Dexter.
Yes, right there.
This was the nexus, really, of Black middle class achievement in the city at that time.
Absolutely, it was beautiful, that community, and it those houses were really impressive. They had what we now call original details. They were gorgeous, and that house in particular, it was a gorgeous 4-bedroom colonial. And as the 7th member of the household, I just felt its space, and I felt the freedom that I had there. It was really important. I think it really shaped my idea of what was possible in the world. And that pride, you could feel it. Not just my own family's pride, but our extended family, the community, our relatives from down south all felt some kind of way about Fanny having this gorgeous home. It was a real achievement, actually. And I do get a lot of emails, which I guess you would call fan mail today, from people, and let me say, across the cultural spectrum, all kinds of people telling me their stories, their family histories, and what their parents did or grandparents did. It's like, wow, this is truly the quintessential American way.
Yeah.
You know, and that was something that's been very satisfying. I will point out that I did work very diligently to write a book that was filled with cultural context. I wanted to wrap my mother's story around a sense of place and time, so you understood where she found herself, given where we were in the culture. So I'm hopeful that that added to people's sense of really admiring what she did.
Just ahead, a photo series featuring images of native Detroiters in city neighborhoods. But first, here's a 1989 Detroit Black Journal conversation about the city's historic Black Bottom neighborhood.
Let's first of all establish exactly what area we're talking about. We have a couple of maps that might give some people an idea of what areas we're talking about, but generally the exhibit, Sylvia, is John R. to Russell, and then...
Well, it really chronicles the growth of the Black community, starting from actually the river, from the Detroit River, which is the Lower East Side, known as Black Bottoms, and then it chronicles the growth, how that community expanded and grew up to the boulevard, particularly during the years of 1955 through 1945, the years of the two great migrations.
Okay, and we have a map that's on the screen right now, and we're going to go in a little bit closer in a minute so you can see what some of those streets are, but I know the boundaries in terms of the colors on the map are all the way down to Jefferson, as Sylvia mentioned, and up to Grand Boulevard, and then on the west, John R., and on the east, Russell Street, and then some of those neighborhoods are broken down within that.
Right.
We also are going to give you just a little preview of some of the pictures, the photographs that you'll see at that exhibit at the Historical Museum right now, and that'll give people also a frame of reference of the era we're talking about and the kinds of things that you would see in those Black neighborhoods at that time. Let's take a look at some of those pictures. Sylvia, I know you remember this is in the exhibit. I believe that just talking about the fact that housing conditions did get a little crowded there, and I think this was an editorial cartoon.
Right. Actually, from the very beginning, there was never what you would call quality housing for African Americans who came to Detroit, particularly after the turn of the century. And as more and more people began to come into an area that was already limited in housing, and also because of the very strict and rigid segregation and racial practices in terms of housing and employment.
Recognize some of these corners and some of these locations?
Right. This is a beauty shop. Beauty shops and restaurants and grocery stores were some of the key businesses.
Okay, that was
Blacks
Ruby Lee's beauty shop.
Right.
Here's a dress shop, I guess.
Yes, clothing was another very important avenue in terms of generating income. We're looking
this is
at
something we'll all recognize, I'm
right,
sure.
the Gotham Hotel, which was one of the major hotels in the country as far as the black community was concerned. It was purchased in 1943, and it had 300 rooms, and it was 9 stories high, and it was the place to stay whenever anyone came to the black community here in Detroit.
The City of Detroit's Neighborhood Natives portrait series shows photos of prominent Detroiters taken in the neighborhoods where they grew up. One Detroit's Will Glover spoke with the city's photographer, Cyrus Tedda, about the project, which took a year to complete.
Where did the idea for the Neighborhood Natives project come from?
The editor of the site, Aaron Foley, he kind of came to each of us on the team. It's a 5-person team, and came to each of us and said, I want you guys to be able to grow, you know, and build your brand. So Amber Lewis, she is the director of social media in the mayor's office. She was a part of that meeting. I just knew that I wanted to take photos of dope Detroiters, you know, photographing high-profile people from Detroit back home where they're from, just to, I guess in a sense, bring them down to a real-life level and let people know that there are superstars, you know, living right next door to you, and we should feel proud of where we come from. The first person that we ended up shooting was Mary Wilson. We were at Crane's homecoming, I think it was 2017, and Mary was there, and Amber just had the idea to go in the back. She's like, I'm gonna try to get Mary for the photo shoot. 30 minutes or 40 minutes later, we're with Mary Wilson in the Brewster Projects. We stole her from Crane's homecoming. And we were in the Brewster Projects, and we did a shoot. And she was already dressed up. She was dressed for the occasion, and me, Amber, and I scoped out the scene a little bit, kind of picked our spots where we wanted her to shoot, but we did the shoot. She even sang for us, and that was how we kicked off the series.
What was it and when was it that you got led into photography?
It wasn't until I got to college and went to University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, and there was just a plethora, overload of resources to use. Oh, you know what? I like that. Can you look down again? I started rapping in high school, but I started to do more of it in college, and then the rapping led to me designing and started a clothing line, and then I needed photos from my clothing line, so I started taking pictures. So that's how I picked up the camera. I'm gonna do it in one take. I like it.
What is the importance of you having the access and resources to start down one artistic path to discover another and so on and so forth that lands you here?
Yeah, access and resources are everything, especially youth and young people coming from Detroit, because, you know, coming up, there's not always, you know, everything is not at our fingertips. Growing up in Detroit, you don't feel like that, like the world is at your fingertips. Being able to have these resources and people in my family, like my aunt who gave me my first camera that she used to use, it just made me realize that if more youth had these resources even earlier than I did, you know, I had them as a college freshman. If I had this starting off in high school, there's no telling, you know, how far I would be. So these resources for young people are very important.
The Neighborhood Natives photo series can be seen online at theneighborhoods.org. That's our program for today. Thanks again to Motor City Java House for having us. Go to AmericanBlackJournal.org for more information on our guests, and you can always connect with us on Facebook and on Twitter. We'll see you next time.